There is a kind of anxiety that doesn't scream. It whispers. It hides behind just checking text, behind replayed conversations in your head, behind the need to know what they meant, what they'll do, how they feel. And you call it care. You call it love. You call it being emotionally aware. But what if it's not that? What if it's control? Wearing the mask of emotional intelligence? The truth is, most anxiety isn't about the present. It's about your resistance to not knowing, to not controlling. That's the illusion. You think if you understand everything, you'll feel safe. But safety isn't in knowing. It's in surrender. Carl Jung said, "The self is not something one finds. It is something one must create." But creation doesn't happen in panic. It happens in presence. Let me tell you about Ava. Ava was someone who felt everything. She could read a room like a book. She could tell when someone pulled away, even slightly, even silently. And every time she sensed it, she would try to fix it, reach out more, reassure more, over-explain. Because if she could just control how they saw her, maybe she could prevent the pain. But that's not how it works. People don't stay because you're hyper-aware. They stay because you're self-aware. Ava didn't understand that. So every time someone pulled away, she spiraled, overthinking, obsessing, texting when she didn't want to, checking their stories, reading between every line, as if it was a survival skill. And it was, because when you don't feel safe inside yourself, you seek that safety in other people. But that search is what keeps you anxious, because emotional security, built on other people's behavior, will never last. It wasn't until Ava stopped chasing reassurance that she started finding peace. She realized the need to know, the urge to control, wasn't love. It was fear. Fear of being forgotten. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being unchosen. And that fear made her abandon herself in order to stay close to others. But the cost? She was never close to herself. So she did something radical. She stopped responding right away. She stopped apologizing when she hadn't done anything. She stopped trying to read every emotional signal. And instead, she turned inward. She asked, "What do I feel? What do I want? What's mine to carry? And what's not?" And slowly, the anxiety faded. Not because the world became safer, but because she did. This is emotional sovereignty. It's not about being cold. It's about being rooted. So when the next wave of overthinking hits, when your chest tightens, when your brain spins, pause, ask yourself, is this mine to control? Because if it isn't, then it's not worth your energy. The truth is, you will never control what others feel, or how they interpret you, or whether they stay or go. But you can control your response. You can create your own safety. And that is freedom. So the next time you feel the urge to chase answers, choose presence instead. Breathe, feel, detach. Not to run away, but to return to yourself. Because peace doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from knowing yourself and trusting that's enough. Always. There's a difference between being private and being guarded, between protecting your energy and pushing people away. But when you've been hurt, it's easy to confuse the two. You build walls, not because you hate connection, but because connection has cost you too much. So you shut down, or you overgive, or you disappear in plain sight. You stop trusting your own yes. You stop trusting your own no. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And most people don't even know they're saying yes out of fear, not love. Fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of seeming selfish. So they abandon themselves. One sure I don't mind at a time. But here's the truth. Sovereignty begins where self-abandonment ends. And boundaries are the end of that abandonment. Not walls. Boundaries. Walls shut everything out. Even the good. Even the love. But boundaries? They filter. They protect. They honor. Let me tell you about Nico. Nico was the type who said yes, to everything. Always available, always helpful, always nice. People loved him, but deep down, he felt empty, resentful, invisible. He gave rides at midnight, listened to rants for hours, loaned money he didn't have, gave his weekends to everyone else's emergencies. And the whole time, he smiled, because he thought that's what love looked like. But he was disappearing, quietly. Every yes that meant no took a little more from him, until one day, he snapped at his best friend over something small, and the guilt hit him like a wave. But that moment woke him up. He realized he wasn't angry at his friend. He was angry at himself for always betraying his own needs just to keep the peace. So Nico started doing something radical. He paused before answering. He said, "Let me check and get back to you." He stopped rushing to fix things. He let people sit in their own discomfort. And for the first time, he started feeling peace. At first, it felt like guilt, like he was letting people down. But then, it started feeling like truth, because the people who truly valued him didn't walk away. They listened, they respected, they stayed, and the ones who left were only there for the version of him that abandoned himself. Boundaries revealed what love really was. Not control, not obligation, but choice. Here's what most don't realize. A boundary isn't a rejection of you. It's a return to me. It says, I still care about you, but I care about me too. It's not selfish. It's sacred. When you set boundaries, you stop being reactive. You stop living on defense. You begin to create your life. Instead of just managing chaos, your time becomes intentional. Your space becomes sacred. Your energy becomes selective. You stop explaining so much. You stop over-justifying. You stop proving your worth through availability. And you start listening to your inner yes, your quiet no, your deep knowing. So if you're constantly drained, constantly overwhelmed, ask yourself, where have I confused love with compliance? Where have I made myself small to keep someone else comfortable? Because boundaries aren't just about saying no, they're about saying yes to the life you actually want, to the peace you deeply crave. And here's what no one tells you. Boundaries don't push love away. They purify it. They remove the expectations, the conditions, the silent scorekeeping. What's left is real, clean, free. So let this be your reminder. You don't have to explain why you need space. You don't have to feel guilty for resting. You don't have to tolerate what hurts you, just to keep people close. The people who are meant for you will meet you at your boundary, not your breaking point. And every time you honor yourself, you teach the world how to honor you too. This is emotional sovereignty, not cold, not distant, but rooted and whole. Because when you stop abandoning yourself, you stop begging others to see you. You've already seen yourself, and that changes everything. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being unseen. You're surrounded, but not felt, listened to, but not heard. And so you start explaining, over and over, trying to be clear, trying to be fair, trying to make sense to people who were never really trying to understand you. And that's the wound, the chase for understanding, as proof that you're allowed to exist as you are. But here's the truth. You don't need to be understood to be free. You just need to stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And you know what's more terrifying than rejection? Being rejected after trying so hard to be likable. So we perform, we adjust, we soften our voice, we shrink our truth, we put disclaimers on our boundaries. We say, "I'm sorry, but I hope this makes sense." Does that sound okay to you? But here's what we forget. Your truth doesn't need permission. It just needs a voice. Let me tell you about Leah. Leah was a people person, warm, empathetic, always the easy one in the group. But she had opinions, strong ones. She had needs, real ones. She had pain, buried deep under the smile. And every time she tried to bring it up, she'd get interrupted, minimized, told she was being too much. So she started staying quiet, playing small, laughing at jokes that stung, agreeing to plans she didn't want, being available when she needed rest, until she didn't recognize herself anymore. And the worst part? No one noticed, because she had trained them to love a version of her that was never fully her. Then one day, she sat across from a friend who said something careless again, and instead of letting it slide, she said, "That hurt." The room went silent. The friend got defensive, said, "You're too sensitive." And Leah felt the old impulse rise, to apologize, to backpedal, to make herself small again. But this time, she didn't. She said, "I'm allowed to feel hurt. You don't have to agree, but you do have to respect it." And in that moment, she chose freedom over approval. Did the friend stay? No, but Leah did. She stayed with herself, and that was the first time she felt peace, because sometimes being misunderstood is the price of being authentic, and it's worth it. Here's what no one tells you. People who need you to explain your worth will never see it, and people who truly see you don't need the explanation. You don't need a PowerPoint presentation for your boundaries. You don't need a TED Talk for your needs. You don't need a courtroom defense for your truth. You just need to say, "This is where I stand," whether you get it or not. That's sovereignty. It's the moment you stop asking, "Will they like me if I say this?" and start asking, "Will I like myself if I don't?" And when you make that shift, everything changes. You stop living to be chosen. You start choosing yourself. You stop fearing rejection. You start respecting your reality, and you realize that being misunderstood isn't the end of connection. It's the beginning of clarity, because the people who truly love you don't need you to shrink, don't need you to edit, don't need you to earn their respect. They meet you where you are. They don't mold you into who they prefer. So if you're tired of explaining, of justifying, of proving, here's your permission to stop. You are not a brand. You are a soul. You are not a concept. You are a person. And people don't need to be decoded to be honored. So speak. Soften your voice only when you choose, not when others demand it. Let your truth be loud, even if it makes others uncomfortable, because the discomfort of others is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to yourself, to stand in your truth, to own your needs, to release the pressure, to be palatable, because your peace is not a group project, and your freedom begins the moment you stop needing to be understood and start trusting that being real is more powerful than being liked. Always, discipline gets a bad name. People think it means punishment, rigidity, control, a joyless life of rules and routines. But real discipline is not a cage, it's a compass. It doesn't confine you, it frees you to live the life you say you want. Because the truth is, you're already disciplined. You just might be disciplined in the wrong direction. Disciplined in overthinking. Disciplined in self-doubt. Disciplined in people-pleasing. Disciplined in numbing when things get hard. So the question isn't, do I have discipline? What have I trained myself to tolerate? Carl Jung once said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." And that truth cuts deep, because most of us know what we should do. We know what would help. We know what's healthy. But knowing isn't the problem. Following through, that's the real struggle. Let me tell you about Marcus. Marcus wanted to change his life. He said he wanted peace, focus, better health, more creativity. So he bought a new planner, subscribed to productivity YouTubers, downloaded 5 different habit trackers. But every night, he'd scroll for hours, eat whatever was easy, avoid the hard conversations, skip the journaling, skip the walk, skip the rest he claimed he needed, not because he didn't care, but because he was tired. of disappointing himself. And every time he broke a promise to himself, he lost trust in his own word, until one day, he looked in the mirror and whispered, "I don't need more motivation. I need a new identity." So he tried something different, small, unimpressive, but real. He started waking up and doing one thing, making his bed. That's it. Then after a week, he added stretching. Then he replaced one soda with water. Not all, just one. No huge declarations, no shame spirals, just one promise at a time. And slowly, he began to feel different, not because his life changed overnight, but because he started to believe himself again. That's discipline, not the loud kind, but the quiet consistency. Discipline is not about being perfect. It's about keeping your word to yourself. It says, "I matter enough to not ghost my own goals." And this is where most people get it wrong. They think self-love is about indulgence, letting themselves off the hook. But real self-love sometimes sounds like, go to bed, stop scrolling, have the hard conversation, write even when you don't feel like it, not because you're being mean to yourself, but because you refuse to keep betraying your potential. Discipline is love in action. It's not hustle culture. It's healing culture. It says, I care about me enough to build habits that honor my future, not just my impulses. And when you build that, you don't need to rely on willpower, because your life starts to hold you. The routine becomes the rhythm. The habit becomes the healing. So if you're tired of starting over, stop starting big. Start tiny. Start real. Start with one action. Repeat it, because trust isn't built by intensity. It's built by reliability. The same way you learn to trust a friend who shows up every time they say they will. You learn to trust yourself when you do the same. So here's your reminder. You don't need to transform your life overnight. You just need to show up for yourself today. Even if it's just 5 minutes, even if no one sees it, especially if no one sees it, because the most powerful discipline happens in private, in silence, in the moments where it would be easier to quit, but you choose not to. That choice, repeated, becomes freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to become who you were always meant to be. And that's real power. Most people think detachment means coldness, that you've stopped caring, that you've shut down. But real detachment is sacred. It's not the absence of love. It's the presence of self-respect. It says, I can care about you without abandoning me, because here's the hard truth. You can love people and still need space. You can be there for others without destroying yourself to do it. Detachment isn't rejection. It's realignment. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And so many of us are unconsciously attached to chaos, to proving our worth, to being the hero in everyone else's story. We think love means showing up, no matter the cost. But love without boundaries is just self-sacrifice in disguise. Let me tell you about Hannah. Hannah was the strong one, always checking in, always listening, always holding space. But when she needed someone, silence, excuses, discomfort, she began to notice that people only reached out when they needed something, only called when they were falling apart, never just to say, how are you really? And the worst part? She still answered, not because she wanted to, but because she didn't want to be seen as selfish. Until one night, after another draining call, she sat on her bed and cried, not from sadness, but from exhaustion, not because of what people took, but because she kept giving, more than she had. And in that moment, she made a quiet decision. I'm done betraying myself to be loved. She turned off her notifications, unfollowed accounts that drained her, stopped explaining her silence. She stopped responding to guilt. At first, it felt cruel. It felt like losing people. It felt like failure. But over time, she realized something. What she lost was never real support. It was performance, codependence, conditional affection. And what she gained was peace. You see, detachment isn't distance. It's clarity. It says, I see what this is, and I choose to relate to it differently. It's the moment you realize you don't have to absorb everything you feel. You don't have to fix everyone who's hurting. You don't have to stay just because you once cared. You can still have love and still say no. You can still be kind and still walk away. You can still grieve someone and still grow without them. Because loving yourself sometimes sounds like silence, like leaving the group chat, like choosing solitude over one-sided loyalty. Let that be okay. You are allowed to protect your energy without apology, without over-explaining, without guilt. And the people who truly love you won't need an explanation. They'll feel the shift and honor it, because when you detach from what drains you, you create space for what restores you. And that is how you begin to come home to yourself. So if you've been feeling heavy, ask yourself, what am I carrying that isn't mine? What pain am I recycling? What love am I clinging to that no longer nourishes me? And then, breathe, pause, release. You don't have to solve it all. Just step away from it. Let go, not out of resentment, but out of reverence. Reverence for your peace, reverence for your growth, reverence for the version of you that no longer needs chaos to feel alive. Detachment is a love language to yourself. Says, I matter too. I don't need to prove my worth through pain. I don't need to explain why I'm choosing myself. It's not cold. It's sacred. It's your return to self-trust, to clarity, to freedom. So here's your permission to log off, to not reply, to not rescue, to simply say, this is not my burden. And in that quiet boundary, you'll find something profound. Your power, your voice, your peace. That's not distance. That's devotion to the life you were born to live. So much of your life you've spent reacting to expectations, to pressure, to pain that isn't even yours. You've been shaped by what others needed, by what they lacked, by what they projected. And somewhere in that process, you lost something sacred, your emotional sovereignty, the ability to say, this is mine, this is not, this is how I feel, no matter what others expect me to feel. But here's the truth no one teaches us. You are not a mirror. You are not here to reflect what others want to see. You are a world, a whole emotional universe, and you are allowed to protect it, to build walls around it, to open the gates on your terms. That is sovereignty, not coldness, not detachment for the sake of ego, but for the sake of clarity and choice. Because when you don't own your emotions, someone else will. A parent, a partner, a stranger on the internet, and you'll live your whole life reacting instead of creating. Carl Jung once said, the self is not something one finds. It is something one must create. You don't find peace. You build it, one boundary at a time, one hard decision at a time, one moment of honesty with yourself at a time. And I know, it's easier to stay distracted, to stay pleasing, to stay small, because choosing yourself feels like loss. At first, loss of approval, loss of certain friendships, loss of identity. But what you gain is something no one can ever take from you again. Your inner authority, your emotional grounding, your ability to move through the world without begging for validation. Let me tell you about Eli. Eli spent years in relationships that mirrored one thing: control. He'd shrink himself so they'd feel safe. He'd dim his joy so they wouldn't feel insecure. He thought compromise meant becoming invisible, until one day, a friend said to him, "You've made everyone comfortable, except yourself." And that line woke something up. He began writing again. He started saying no. He let the phone ring without guilt. He stopped over-explaining. And what followed wasn't applause. It was silence, confusion, pushback. But Eli kept going, because for the first time, he wasn't trying to be chosen. He was choosing himself. And that is what emotional sovereignty looks like. It's not always glamorous. It's not always seen. But it's always felt. A quiet confidence. A deep knowing that you don't owe your life to being understood by everyone. You owe it to being true to yourself. So if you've been feeling lost, let me offer you this. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not too sensitive. You are just tired of being emotionally outsourced. And it's time to come back to your voice, back to your values, back to your center. And that journey doesn't require anyone's permission, just yours. So here's the invitation. Detach from what doesn't serve. Discipline what distracts. Define what you desire. And declare this moment as the beginning of your emotional sovereignty. Not tomorrow. Not after they understand. Not after you feel fully ready. No, in this breath, in this choice, or home to yourself.